So I think many of you are familiar with Artsy, particularly since Monday's New York Times article. But can you briefly explain what Artsy is and how it got started?
Sure. So the goal for Artsy is to make all the world's art freely accessible. But I would say even beyond that, what we really want to do is we want to make art something that not just everyone has access to, but something that everyone cares about, something that everyone is passionate about. We really look at the way music has evolved over the last 100 years from something that was originally only accessible to a certain class of people. If you could talk about having gone to a concert, if you could talk about musicians, it was very much a sign of class. Now, though, with the radio and the record player, music is something that's common to everyone. It's not a big deal. You can walk up to anyone on the street and ask them who's their favorite musician or what's the last concert they went to, and everyone will have an enthusiastic response. But today, in the art world, it's really the same way the music world was 100 years ago. In major city centers, culture centers, a lot of people are very engaged with art. But once you step outside of major cities, the vast, vast majority of people in the world really have no idea, they're not engaged with it. And most importantly, they have almost like an emotional, there's almost an emotional barrier where sometimes people say things like, oh, well, I'm not cool enough for that, or people feel intimidated to go into institutions or into galleries. And we really think like that's the big problem, is that there are these negative associations now with art. And we think by making it more accessible, we can just make it something that's common to everyone's passion.
So you're extending art's reach and impact on our world, as many of the artists are also doing, through a democratization of art, technology, economics, and commerce. And behind us, we have your mission, which everyone can read on the website. And this is a lot of things going on in your mission of really using art to change the world. So how will you do this?
Sure. So on its most basic level, what we've done, what we've actually spent the last few years doing is partnering with institutions. So the really big challenge here is similar to the challenge Netflix faces in film or that Spotify faces in music. We want to do everything kind of the legal way and in partnership. We don't just want to scrape and take people's images without their consent. So the fundamental thing that needs to be solved is we need to partner with everyone and convince them that Artsy is a platform worth investing in, that our mission is something that people can get on board with. And so when we launched on Monday, we launched in partnership with over 50 museums and over 275 galleries. So we still have a really long way to go. But for many of these institutions, it's the first time they've ever put their collections online. And so we think that's kind of the basic thing that needs to happen. You need to have the art online, and you need to have it accessible. And a lot of this art that went live on Monday, that's the first time the public have been able to access it, no matter where they are in the world, as long as they have an internet connection.
So having worked here at the museum, I know that throughout the last maybe 25, 50 years, it's been really difficult to digitize work, to get permissions. Just the artists don't necessarily want their images out there. There's heavy copyright. There's a lot of barriers to letting public have the access to images. So how have you solved that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. We do get a lot of resistance, but I would say we actually get more enthusiastic responses than anything else. I think when I looked at like Naomi's work and Phil's work, and I think so much of what they're doing, for Phil, it very much relies on this idea of like digital documentation. If the work is going to be destroyed, then you have to have some way of documenting it and making sure people can find out about it. For Naomi's work, it's all about creating awareness. And ideally, you have everyone there in person, but they're not going to be able to show up if they're not aware of it. And once the exhibition is over, it can be hard for people to access it. So I think far more artist institutions than not, they see the benefits there outweighing any potential cons. We've also invested in technology, though, to help people protect their art. So I think if we go to the next slide, I don't know if there's an artwork on it. Well, we'll get to this in a second. But any art you see on Artsy is actually fragments that are being reconstituted on your browser to prevent people from downloading the artwork. So we actually kind of like break the work down and then reconstruct it algorithmically to try and protect the work so people can't can't steal it.
So going back to how Artsy functions, it's very similar to Pandora. Pandora is one of the, Pandora's CEO is one of your advisors. And it filters, you have 20,000 images by 3,000 artists, and it filters into that art into the Art Genome Project.
That's right.
So can you explain some of the, can you talk a little bit
Yeah.
about what the Art Genome
Yeah,
Project
so that's the second thing, and which you said, how are we going to get more people passionate and educated about art? The first thing is you have to have the art. But then the second big problem is for many people, you show them an artwork, and I think someone said it earlier, sometimes the reaction is, well, I could do that, or what's the big deal with this, or why should I care about this? So that context and the educational material around it is so important if you're going to take someone who's never seen art before and you're going to try and get them to fall in love with it. And so what we've done is we've created the Art Genome Project. So we're actually not that similar to Pandora because in terms of the consumption experience, because you can see any work you want anytime. But the Art Genome Project, and you see a bunch of the genes up here, is a way of contextualizing. So genes can be any characteristic. So you have on the left side, you have traditional art historical movements like abstract expressionism, tonalism, pop art. But what you also have, if you move over to the right, is contemporary art. And this is where it's kind of interesting because the last 50 years have been some of the most dynamic and innovative years for art. But because it's so recent, historians have been reticent to convert that into a taxonomy compared to like the more classical, established, canonical art historical movements. But we know that many of our users are coming to the site, they're seeing contemporary art, and contemporary art can be particularly intimidating and difficult to understand, a lot of conceptual art. And so we realize it's very important for us to genome contemporary art. So every time we have a new body of art come in, so now we're working on design art and video art, that's coming next. But when we had to go through contemporary art, we had to say, okay, how can we try and tease out patterns and themes and ideas from contemporary art to make it more accessible, to make it more understandable for our users. And so what you see in that second column from the left is what we've informally labeled contemporary tendencies. We don't want to use the term movement and be heavy-handed. But there's ways of discovering contemporary art, so things like contemporary grotesque, contemporary DIY, contemporary participation. And so that's just a great example of how the genome is going to be this constantly evolving
So let's go into one of the genes. What I love about Artsy is the educational component. Anytime you have to write a blurb for a museum or a gallery, you always have to go back to art history. So here it's actually like a very easy but interesting wiki for contemporary art. And it also allows you to curate. So we can't really see down, but you can then choose artists or look through artists who fall under this gene of pop art. But I know that curators, museums, and galleries often believe that we or those institutions are uniquely qualified to make these taxonomies and consider it maybe not a democratic thing, and that it should be left to specialists. And I know that Rob Storr has critiqued Artsy in two ways, in its classification criteria and cultural assumptions, and the choices of works. So this is a question that all curators are asked because this is the access point. This is the gatekeeper, or the gate that remains or opens or closes. How do you choose the artworks, and how do you choose the artists?
Yeah, well, first to start by talking about the curation. I mean, the team that does, we call it genoming internally, so it means categorizing all the artworks based on all the genes, is a team of art historians, and actually the head of our Genome Project, like Rob Storr, is actually his thesis advisor, so we were upset to see those comments. But the point is that it's all done by humans who've dedicated their lives to art history, and we totally understand curators, gallerists, when they say, well, aren't our voices more special? And I think someone who's dedicated their lives to art, absolutely, should be listened to. And I think This goes into how do we curate, how do we choose. We work with galleries, we work with museums and with estates. And so we're inherently recognizing the voices of those curators in how we actually bring art onto the site. So like I said, it's over 50 galleries now and over 50 museums, over 275 galleries. So we inherently, our system, it works through the curation of others. We're actually not ourselves picking the artists and the artworks.
And you, so this is a very short track record from the initial idea to 2 years later of building and creating. You have major investors, Twitter, Google, Dasha Zukova, thought leaders in emerging tech, the tech and art world. Could you tell us how that idea blossomed into this, and also maybe talk about some of the pitfalls or lessons to learn from?
Artsy actually started my senior year of college in my dorm room. I was very lucky to have been one of those few people who was exposed to art from a young age. My father's an art writer, so as a kid, I grew up getting dragged, kicking and screaming, to galleries and museums, and I was like, Dad, what's the big deal with this stuff? Like, why are we here? And he'd really take the time to explain the art to me, and I really started to fall in love with it. My mom's side of the family, though, is old physicists, so I actually went to college for physics originally, but got addicted to programming and ended up majoring in computer science engineering. And so in many ways, I saw this as a way to kind of bring together all the things that I really loved, so essentially art and science. This image from our website is actually a great example of that. This looks like an installation shot, but everything in this that you're seeing here is algorithmically generated. The dimensions of the room, the viewer's distance from the artwork, and even the height of the artwork and the shadow beneath it were all generated to give an optimal viewing experience to the user, and that's the result of a very, very deep collaboration between designers and engineers, I think art and science. And it took several years, even after graduating, just to kind of get a basic prototype built, get in front of certain investors. And those were certainly some grueling days for us, always being afraid of running out of money and of dying. But eventually we got in touch with the right people, many of the names you just listed, who believed in what we were doing, and yeah, I guess the rest is history.
And so now, what do you see as the future of Artsy? You mentioned that people can curate, you're going to include videos, and what about the commerce side?
Yeah, so if the vision for Artsy is to make all the world's art accessible, if we were to try and do that as a nonprofit institution, we would be throwing fundraisers every night of the year. The only way something that ambitious could ever be financially viable is if we tap into the commercial component of the art market. And we actually think by getting more people excited about art, we're going to vastly expand the art market. And we make money as a percentage of any sales we make with our commercial partners, but that actually makes Artsy completely free for everyone else. So for institutional partners, we host all their images for free. For people who want to use the site, it's completely free.
And so you mentioned initially you had to go out to galleries, and now they come to you. How do you make those decisions as to who will be in, or is it a completely democratic process?
It's really hard. We are very fortunate that now they're coming to us, which again is surreal, considering in the early days we were getting thrown out of galleries left and right. Like, why would I ever work with a 22-year-old? But we do want to be, I think, it's a tough call, but right now, just given our limited resources, we're sort of focusing on the group that we currently have. But over time, we would love to expand.
And now, my final question is about the merging of art, science, technology, and design. That is what you see as really summarizing Artsy.
Yeah, I would say we're really inspired by Apple there. Steve Jobs said if you had to boil Apple down to one idea, it's about bringing together technology and the liberal arts. And that's a torch that we're excited to try and carry on ourselves.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.